It started with dramatic headlines. In spring 2025, news flashed. Japanese Coast Guard intercepts Chinese vessel near Senkaku Islands. China stages massive naval drills. Tensions boiled over. Japan and China stood at the brink of crisis. Social media exploded with jets, warships, and speeches. The standoff was about pride, security, and Asia's future. Japan and China have a long, complicated relationship. At the heart of today's tensions is a cluster of small, uninhabited islands in the East China Sea. Japan calls them the Senkaku Islands. China calls them the Diaoyu. Both claim them as their own. For years, both sides have sent ships and planes near these islands, leading to tense encounters. The waters are rich in fish and possibly oil and gas. Control means resources and national pride. China's military has grown, and its ships now patrol close to Japan. Meanwhile, Japan's alliance with the US makes China uneasy. In 2025 and 2026, tensions have reached a new high, raising fears across the region. Many of the problems between Japan and China today are shaped by history. Memories of Japan's wartime actions in China remain painful for many Chinese people. For Japan, the post-war era was about rebuilding and embracing peace. Yet, old wounds have never fully healed. Nationalism is strong on both sides. In China, leaders often remind people of the century of humiliation at the hands of foreign powers, including Japan. In Japan, some politicians argue that it is time to move past guilt and focus on current challenges. These emotions make compromise difficult. Historical disputes are not just about the past. They affect how both countries see the present. Some in Japan worry that a rising China wants to rewrite the rules of Asia. In China, there is suspicion that Japan seeks to block its rise or limit its influence. Recent anniversaries and political speeches have brought these issues to the surface. Demonstrations, angry editorials, and heated comments online have fueled the crisis. Governments are under pressure to stand firm, not show weakness. The past shapes the choices of today, and those choices, in turn, will shape the region's future. Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi has become the face of Japan's new defense era. When the crisis deepened in late 2025, she made a bold choice. For decades, Japan's military was limited by a pacifist constitution. Now, that is changing. Takaichi's government pushed through major reforms. The self-defense forces received more funding and new equipment. The government approved plans to buy advanced missiles, strengthen cyber defenses, and boost naval patrols. New security agreements were signed with the United States, Australia, and even some Southeast Asian countries. One of the most controversial moves was relaxing legal limits on Japan's right to use force if attacked. For the first time, Japanese ships could fire warning shots near disputed islands. Japanese fighter jets began joint drills with US and British forces. Critics worried this could provoke China, but supporters said it was necessary for deterrence. The Japanese public was divided. Some feared war, but many supported Takaichi's tough stance. "We cannot depend only on others," she said in a televised address. "We must be ready to defend our country." Japan, once known for restraint, was entering a new era, one built on strength and vigilance. China answered Japan's moves with a show of force. Warships and Coast Guard vessels increased patrols near the Senkaku or Diaoyu Islands. Fighter jets flew close to Japanese airspace, sending a clear message. China would not back down. But China also used economic pressure, restricting Japanese imports and urging tourists to avoid Japan. The goal was to make Japan feel the cost of standing up to Beijing. International observers watched nervously as tensions continued to rise. The crisis sent shockwaves through Japan's economy. Stock markets fell sharply when the standoff began. Investors worried about trade disruptions, falling tourism, and rising defense costs. Some Japanese companies reported delays and losses due to Chinese restrictions. The government tried to reassure the public. Emergency funds were set aside to help affected industries. New trade deals were sought with other countries, including India and Southeast Asian nations. Technology firms, in particular, looked to diversify supply chains away from China. Public opinion shifted. For years, many Japanese people favored peaceful diplomacy with China. But as the crisis unfolded, polls showed rising support for stronger defense. News reports of close encounters and economic threats made people anxious but also more determined. Yet not everyone agreed. Some business leaders and opposition politicians warned against escalation. They argued that Japan's prosperity depended on stable ties with China. Street protests, though smaller than in the past, called for peace and negotiation. Japan was feeling the pain of the crisis, but it was also finding new sources of resilience and unity. What happens between Japan and China affects the whole Indo-Pacific region. The United States, Japan's main ally, quickly pledged support. U.S. warships joined joint patrols in the East China Sea. American leaders urged calm, but made it clear they would defend Japan if attacked. Southeast Asian countries watched with concern. Many have their own disputes with China in the South China Sea. Some, like the Philippines and Vietnam, quietly welcomed Japan's assertiveness. Others worried that a bigger conflict could hurt regional trade and security. Taiwan, just 150 kilometers from the disputed islands, was especially nervous. Its government increased military readiness and warned China not to use force. Japan strengthened ties with Taiwan, sharing information and holding unofficial talks on security. Australia, India, and other regional partners also weighed in. Diplomatic visits, emergency summits, and calls for restraint filled the headlines. No one wanted war, but everyone prepared for the worst. The crisis was reshaping alliances, partnerships, and the balance of power in Asia. With military standoffs and tough words on both sides, diplomacy was put to the test. High-level talks were held in neutral cities like Geneva and Singapore. The United States and European Union offered to mediate. Japan and China sent senior officials, but progress was slow. Both countries called for calm in public, but neither wanted to seem weak. Back-channel discussions focused on setting clear rules to avoid accidents at sea or in the air. Some agreements were reached, such as hotlines and protocols for encounters. Alliances grew stronger. Japan and the US updated their defense guidelines. Australia and India joined new joint exercises. Southeast Asian nations formed their own emergency task force to monitor the situation. Still, the risk of a mistake was high. Fishermen, commercial ships, and military vessels crowded the contested waters. The smallest spark, a collision, a misunderstanding, could trigger a wider crisis. The world hoped that words, not weapons, would win the day. The crisis remains unresolved. As of March 2026, Japanese and Chinese forces continue high-alert patrols near the disputed islands. Trade restrictions have eased slightly, but mistrust runs deep. Both governments face internal pressure to defend national interests. Prime Minister Takaichi's tough stance has changed Japan's security policies for good. China's leaders are determined not to back down. The United States, Taiwan, and Southeast Asian countries stand ready, watching for the next move. Will diplomacy succeed? Can new rules and alliances keep the peace? Or will another incident push Asia into greater danger? Much depends on the choices made in Tokyo and Beijing, and the willingness of others to help. The world is holding its breath. The story of Japan and China is far from over. In the months ahead, Asia will find out what kind of future awaits.